Ivy League university presidents failed to denounce calls for genocide, leading to a quick and severe backlash. They tried to play the free speech card, but universities haven't been a haven for free speech in a long time. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. If you've ever applied for Ivy League universities and got rejected, you should probably count that as a blessing, especially if you're Jewish. Earlier last week, the presidents of MIT, UPenn, and Harvard testified before Congress in a hearing on anti-Semitism. And that was timely. Things are getting out of hand at Ivy League schools, particularly for Jewish students who face hate on campus. Ivy League schools are turning a blind eye to the problem, like the way MIT refused to suspend students who made threat to Jews over fears they'd be deported. Yeah, things are bad. But it was still shocking that when these presidents were asked during the hearing if calls for genocide against Jews violated their codes of conduct, they said it was context dependent.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Oh, so calling for genocide of a specific people group isn't targeting individuals of that same group? These Ivy League leaders must be great acrobats given all the mental gymnastics they do to answer a very simple yes-no question.
Yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
Yes or no?
If the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment?
Did all three presidents get together and formulate the exact same answer on whether calling for genocide violates school rules? It's hard not to think so.
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals.
By their own logic, schools should totally be okay with students rallying, saying, McCarthy didn't go far enough. Execute all communists. After all, those are just words, totally not harassment by university standards. Or better yet, switch the group from Jews to Palestinians. I'm sure that endorsing the genocide of Palestinians would totally fly with schools as long as there was no conduct. Unsurprisingly, the presidents had to reckon with swift backlash over their remarks on campus anti-Semitism. It was serious enough that the feds are now investigating schools and universities, including Ivy League ones, over allegations of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Even the CEO of Pfizer, whose relatives died in the Holocaust, blasted the presidents, claiming that the hearing was one of the most despicable moments in the history of U.S. academia. Wow, Big Pharma said something that I can actually agree with. What a wild timeline we're in. Both Republicans and Democrats were quick to blast the Ivy League presidents. Former U.S. Ambassador John Huntsman, a former UPenn trustee, called for a complete leadership change. He said at this point it's not even debatable. Democratic Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro condemned UPenn's remarks, calling them unacceptable and absolutely shameful. And a group of primarily moderate Democrats wrote in a letter that the president's unwillingness to answer questions clearly or fully acknowledge appalling and unacceptable behavior that would not have been tolerated against other groups, illuminated the problematic double standards and dehumanization of the Jewish communities at your universities. Even the White House bashed them. White House spokesperson Andrew Bates, not to be confused with Andrew Tate, said it's unbelievable that this needs to be said. Calls for genocide are monstrous and antithetical to everything we represent as a country. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre also wasn't too pleased with the president's comments.
What I will say is that is something that we do not stand for, right? We do not stand for calls for genocide. That is unacceptable. That is vile. We will call that out.
Wait. Democrats, Republicans, and even Karine Jean-Pierre all agree? Either it's the end times or it's time to buy a lotto ticket. Even Wharton, a prestigious business school within UPenn, is calling for change. The school's board of advisors pushed for a change in leadership at the university by calling for President Liz McGill to resign. While MIT's president had her position on the line, the governing board had a vote of confidence in her favor last week, saying she had the committee's full and unreserved support. But it's not just the reputations of these schools that have gotten absolutely into the gutter. Money is on the line as well. UPenn alum and CEO of Stone Ridge Asset Management, Ross Stevens, is threatening to pull a $100 million donation. Coincidentally, Ivy League presidents are walking back their statements. More after the break. Welcome back. Ivy League schools are getting what many could consider a well-deserved flack for their rather poor takes on genocide in last week's hearing. And they regret bringing the negative press against themselves, because apparently not condemning genocide isn't looked upon very well. Someone even rented out a truck to blast the congressional hearing at Penn. They faced so much heat that UPenn's president felt it necessary to walk back on her statements with a post on X.
In that moment, I was focused on our university's longstanding policies aligned with the U.S. Constitution, which say that speech alone is not punishable. I was not focused on, but I should have been, the irrefutable fact that a call for genocide of Jewish people is a call for some of the most terrible violence human beings can perpetrate. In my view, it would be harassment or intimidation.
Harvard's president likewise backtracked, saying, "Let me be clear, calls for violence or genocide against the Jewish community or any religious or ethnic group are vile. They have no place at Harvard, and those who threaten our Jewish students will be held to account." She also apologized in Harvard's student newspaper. It's fun to watch the presidents of these fine institutions flip-flop like sandals at a beach party whenever confronted. But if Ivy League presidents think making these kinds of comments will absolve them from their previous comments under oath, they're sadly mistaken. Additionally, the government never forgets. U.S. lawmakers are still calling for Ivy League schools to remove their presidents. And the House Committee on Education and the Workforce is investigating Harvard, MIT, and UPenn over anti-Semitism. Not too long after the two presidents backtracked, UPenn's president and chairman of its board of trustees resigned. But the free speech defense was always ridiculous because universities have long abandoned being safe zones of free speech. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, a free speech advocacy group, ranks colleges on free speech, and Harvard received the worst score ever with 0 points. And that's being generous. The actual score was negative 10.69 out of 100. I want to be clear, I'm not making a joke. They really scored in the negative. UPenn likewise ranked very low, being the second worst on the list. And that's what you get for over $200,000 in tuition and fees, a school that receives below an F. Cancel culture is widespread in Ivy League schools. These schools have been quick to shut speech down for far less offensive topics than advocacy for genocide, especially if it doesn't match their progressive values. Such a huge problem that self-censorship has become the norm. And if you're not self-censoring, then, a la the Culture Revolution, the university will want you to do a self-criticism. In 2021, Yale Law School pressured a law student to apologize for a Constitution Day trap house invitation because people thought using the term trap house was offensive. The term was originally slang for a place where people buy drugs, but more recently has come to mean a hangout. Because if you can't find offense in everything, you're not a college student. According to Yale's Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the students' affiliation with the conservative Federalist Society exacerbated the problem as it was too triggering for students. It's not just students. There have been times in which Ivy League schools hammered down on professors and guest speakers over the things they've said. Just to name a few high-profile examples to illustrate this point. In 2021, Harvard lecturer Carol Hooven was blasted by Harvard's DEI director for insisting that there are only two genders and defending terms like male and female. The DEI director in question warned that this dangerous language perpetuates a system of discrimination against non-cis people within the med system. It directly opposes our task force work that aims to create a safe space for scholars of all gender identities and sexes. A year later, UPenn's law school asked for a major sanction against tenured law professor Amy Wax for her comments regarding immigration. Oh, and it's not just people in their communities they want to cancel. They also want to cancel guest speakers. MIT canceled guest lecturer Dorian Abbott, a geophysicist at the University of Chicago, because he opposed race-based admissions. And Harvard disinvited feminist philosopher Devin Buckley for opposing transgender ideology. So to recap, according to PENN, MIT, and Harvard, calling for Jewish genocide is free speech. Saying there are two genders is violence. The problem is, even if the presidents of these schools are fired and replaced, that will do little to change things because the institutions themselves have been captured by progressive Marxist ideologies. So again, if you didn't get into the Ivy League school of your dreams, consider yourself lucky. Or Asian. And check out the latest episode of my new show, Deep Thoughts While Gaming, about the game Big Ambitions and why you can't get ahead in life despite that Ivy League education. Let me know what you think. And you can take comfort in knowing that supporting America Uncovered on Patreon won't limit your freedom of speech. Click the orange button to contribute. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.